The marble steps were ice cold against Leah Connor's knees, but not as cold as the eyes staring down at her from the towering mansion she'd called home for 12 years. Blood trickled from her split lip where Victoria Harrington's ring had caught her during the slap, and the taste of copper mixed with the salt of tears she refused to let fall. "Please," Leah whispered, her voice barely audible above the October wind that whipped through the manicured gardens of the Harrington estate. "I can do better. I can try harder with my reading. You're dyslexic, dear." Victoria's voice dripped with false sweetness, the same tone she used at charity galas when discussing unfortunate children. "We simply cannot have someone defective representing the Harrington name any longer." Behind Victoria, Richard Harrington adjusted his gold cufflinks, his silence more damning than any words. The man who'd once lifted Leah onto his shoulders at the zoo now couldn't even meet her eyes. "Hey beautiful souls. Welcome back to my channel where we dive deep into stories that'll make your heart race and your eyes tear up. Before we continue with Leah's incredible journey, I have to ask, where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you're new here and loving the emotional roller coaster already, smash that subscribe button because trust me, this story is about to take you places you never expected. The wrought iron gates of 47 Beacon Hill Avenue had been Leah's prison and her sanctuary for over a decade. Now, as the electronic lock clicked into place behind her, sealing her out forever, those same gates became the symbol of everything she'd lost and everything she was about to gain. "Miss Leah?" The voice came from behind her, soft and uncertain. Leah's head snapped up, hope flaring in her chest like a struck match. Through her tears, she saw him, John McLean, the Harrington's 18-year-old janitor, standing at the edge of the circular driveway with a worn duffel bag slung over his shoulder. John was everything the Harringtons despised. Working class, unpolished, and kind in a way that made their carefully crafted charity seem hollow. His dark skin gleamed with perspiration from whatever task he'd been pulled away from, and his uniform, always impeccably clean despite the nature of his work, hung loose on his lean frame. "You shouldn't be here," Leah managed, struggling to her feet. Her legs felt like water, threatening to buckle under the weight of rejection. "They'll fire you." John's laugh was bitter, surprising them both. "Already quit." He held up a crumpled piece of paper, his resignation letter, hastily scrawled in pencil. "Told them exactly what I thought about people who throw away children like garbage." The words hit Leah like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. She was garbage to them. Defective merchandise that had outlived its usefulness. "Where will you go?" she asked, because focusing on his problems was easier than drowning in her own. "Same place you're going." John stepped closer, and Leah caught the scent of industrial cleaner and something else, something that smelled like safety. "My grandmother's got a place in Roxbury. It ain't much, but she's got room for 2 more if we don't mind sharing a couch." The kindness in his offer made Leah's chest tighten. Here was someone throwing away his steady job, his future prospects, for a broken girl with nowhere to go. It didn't make sense. Nothing in Leah's 15 years of life had prepared her for such selfless generosity. "Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Why would you do this for me?" John was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on something beyond the mansion's imposing facade. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed too heavy for his 18 years. "Because everybody deserves someone who won't walk away when things get hard." His eyes met hers, and Leah saw her own pain reflected there. A recognition of abandonment, of being deemed not enough. "And because I see you, Leah Conor. Really see you. Not the dyslexia, not the problems with reading. I see the girl who memorizes entire conversations because her ears work better than her eyes. I see someone brilliant in ways those people could never understand." A car door slammed somewhere behind them, followed by the click of expensive heels on asphalt. Victoria Harrington appeared at the gate, her perfectly styled blonde hair unmoved by the wind that was turning Leah's natural curls into a wild halo around her face. "John McLean, I suggest you remove yourself from our property immediately, or I'll be forced to call security." "Already leaving, ma'am." John's voice held a respect his eyes didn't echo. He shouldered his bag and extended his hand to Leah. "Coming with me?" Leah stared at his outstretched palm, calloused from honest work, scarred from small accidents, so different from the manicured hands that had just cast her aside. In that moment, she had two choices: collapse under the weight of rejection, or take the hand of the only person who'd ever chosen her when it mattered. She reached out and intertwined her fingers with his. The touch sent an electric shock up her arm, a jolt of something she was too young to name, but old enough to feel. John's hand was warm and steady, an anchor in the storm of her shattered world. "Let's go," she whispered. As they walked away from the only home she'd ever known, Leah couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't an ending at all. Victoria Harrington stood at those gates watching them disappear into the shadows, her lips curved in a smile that suggested she'd just disposed of two problems with one solution. But she had no idea she'd just created her own worst nightmare. Behind them, the Harrington mansion gleamed in the afternoon sun, its windows like watching eyes. In 15 years, Leah would return to these same gates. But next time, she wouldn't be the one left kneeling on cold marble. Next time, she'd be the one with the power to walk away. What do you think will happen to Leah and John in their new life together? How will love bloom from such a devastating beginning? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you're ready for this emotional journey. The cramped two-bedroom apartment in Roxbury smelled like cinnamon and hope. John's grandmother, Estelle McLean, stood barely 5 feet tall but commanded the room like she was 7 feet of pure determination. Her weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency as she prepared a plate of cornbread that looked like it could feed an army. "Child, you sit yourself down before you fall down," Estelle commanded, pointing a wooden spoon at Leah, who had been standing frozen in the doorway for the past 10 minutes. "Any friend of my Johnny's is family, and family don't stand on ceremony in my house." Leah had never experienced anything like this. In the Harrington mansion, meals were served in the formal dining room by silent staff. Conversation was limited to polite inquiries about academic performance, and affection was as rare as dust on the antique furniture. Here, in this tiny apartment where the couch doubled as John's bed and the kitchen table wobbled on uneven legs, she felt something she'd never experienced before: unconditional acceptance. "Grandma, she's been through hell today," John said softly, settling onto the couch beside where Leah perched on the edge like a bird ready to take flight. "The Harringtons threw her out because of her dyslexia." Estelle's expression darkened. "Lord have mercy on those people's souls, because I surely won't." She set down her spoon with enough force to make the pot ring like a bell. "Child, let me tell you something about being different in this world." She moved to the window, pulling back curtains that had seen better decades. Beyond the glass, the streets of Roxbury pulsed with life. Kids playing stickball despite the October chill, neighbors calling to each other from stoops, music drifting from open windows. "I raised 7 children in this neighborhood, including Johnny's daddy before the good Lord called him home. Every one of them was told they weren't smart enough, good enough, or worthy enough for something or other." Estelle's voice carried the weight of lived experience. "But you know what I learned? The world's got a funny way of measuring worth, and most times they're using a broken scale." Leah felt tears threatening again, but these were different from the tears of rejection she'd shed on the Harrington steps. These tears came from a place she hadn't known existed, a place where someone could look at her broken pieces and see something valuable. "I can't read properly," she whispered, the confession tearing at her throat. "The letters, they dance around on the page. Sometimes they flip backward or upside down." The Harringtons spent thousands on tutors, specialists, medications. Nothing worked. "Reading ain't the only way to be smart," John said, his voice gentle but firm. "You remember every conversation you've ever heard, Leah. You can listen to someone talk for 5 minutes and repeat it back word for word. You see patterns in things that take other people hours to figure out." It was true. Leah had always been able to absorb information through her ears in ways that amazed even her tutors. She could listen to complex instructions once and execute them perfectly, could hear a song and know every lyric after a single play. But the Harringtons had never seen those abilities as assets, only as consolation prizes for her reading deficiency. "Tell me about your dreams, baby girl," Estelle said, settling into her recliner with the authority of a queen taking her throne. "Before those people filled your head with their limitations, what did you want to be when you grew up?" The question hit Leah like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had asked her about her dreams? The Harringtons had been so focused on fixing her perceived defects that they'd never bothered to nurture her actual interests. Leah's voice caught. I used to sketch. Fashion designs. I'd see people on the street and imagine what they'd look like in different clothes. Not expensive designer stuff, but clothes that matched their personalities, their spirits. She glanced around the room, her artist's eye automatically cataloging details. Estelle's cardigan was practical but beautiful, hand-knitted in a pattern that spoke of patience and love. John's work uniform might have been generic, but he wore it with a dignity that transformed cheap polyester into something almost noble. I design clothes for real people, she continued, her voice growing stronger. Not just the wealthy women who shopped where Victoria took me. I wanted to create beautiful things for people who couldn't afford to shop on Newbury Street, but deserved to feel gorgeous anyway. John's eyes lit up with an intensity that made Leah's stomach flutter. You still sketch? Sometimes. When no one's watching. She'd hidden her sketchbooks from the Harringtons after Victoria had found one and dismissed her drawings as unrealistic fantasies for someone of her limitations. Can I see? The question was so simple, so free of judgment, that Leah found herself nodding before her fear could intervene. She reached into her backpack, the only possession the Harringtons had allowed her to take, and pulled out a worn spiral notebook. The pages were filled with designs that ranged from elegant evening wear to practical work clothes, each sketch accompanied by notes written in her careful, painstaking handwriting. But it was the emotional core of each design that truly shone. Clothes that would make a tired mother feel beautiful, uniforms that would give dignity to honest work, dresses that would help a shy girl feel confident. John turned each page with reverence, his calloused fingers careful not to smudge her work. Leah, they're incredible. Look at this dress. You've designed something that would make any woman feel like a queen, but it's still practical enough for everyday wear. It's just silly doodling, she started to say, the Harringtons' dismissive voices echoing in her mind. No. John's voice was sharp enough to cut through her self-doubt. This is genius. This is seeing what the world needs and having the talent to create it. Estelle had moved closer, studying the sketches over John's shoulder. Her eyes, which had seen 7 decades of life's hardships and joys, filled with something that looked suspiciously like pride. Baby girl, let me tell you what I see when I look at these pictures, she said, settling back into her chair. I see someone who understands that beauty isn't about money or status. It's about helping people feel worthy of love and respect. That's not just fashion design, child. That's ministry. The word hung in the air like a blessing. Ministry. Leah had never thought of her sketches as anything more than escapist fantasy, but Estelle was right. Each design came from a deep desire to help people see their own worth, to feel beautiful in a world that often told them they weren't enough. I don't know how to make it real, Leah admitted. I can't read business plans or contracts. I can barely get through a simple book without getting frustrated. That's what partners are for, John said quietly. His hand found hers, and once again, that electric connection sparked between them. You create, I'll handle the business side. We'll figure it out together. The certainty in his voice should have been foolish. They were 2 teenagers with no money, no connections, and no real understanding of how the fashion industry worked. But something in John's unwavering faith made Leah believe that maybe, just maybe, impossible things could become possible. You'd really do that, she whispered. Give up everything to chase a crazy dream with someone like me? John's thumb traced across her knuckles, and the gentleness of the gesture made her breath catch. Leah, you're not someone I'm settling for. You're someone I'm choosing. Every day, for as long as you'll let me. The words hit her like a revelation. For the first time in her 15 years, someone was choosing her not despite her differences, but because of everything she was. John saw her dyslexia not as a flaw to be fixed, but as part of the unique way her mind worked. A mind that could envision beauty where others saw only problems. Besides, Estelle chimed in, her voice carrying a mischievous note, success tastes sweeter when it comes with a side of proving people wrong. And honey, do we have some people to prove wrong? Through the apartment's thin walls, they could hear the sounds of the neighborhood settling into evening. Children being called in for dinner, televisions broadcasting the evening news, the distant hum of traffic. It was nothing like the sterile quiet of Beacon Hill, but it felt more like home than anywhere Leah had ever lived. As if reading her thoughts, John squeezed her hand gently. "We're going to build something beautiful together, Leah. Something the world has never seen before. And when we do," his eyes held a promise that made her heart race. "When we do, everyone who ever underestimated us is going to wish they'd chosen differently." The apartment fell quiet except for the gentle ticking of Estelle's kitchen clock. Outside, streetlights began flickering on, casting long shadows across the walls. Leah closed her eyes and let herself imagine a future where her sketches became reality, where John's faith in her proved justified, where the love she was beginning to feel for him could grow into something that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. She had no idea that in 15 years, that love would be the foundation of an empire that would shake the very foundations of everything the Harringtons believed about worth, success, and the power of choosing love over prejudice. But for now, it was enough to sit on a worn couch in a tiny apartment, holding hands with someone who saw her dreams as blueprints rather than fantasies, surrounded by the kind of love she'd never known existed. 3 months later, the rejection letter arrived on a Tuesday that had started with such promise. Leah stared at the Harvard logo letterhead through the coffee shop window where she worked the early morning shift, her hands trembling as John read the words that shattered her last connection to the life she'd once known. "We regret to inform you that your application for early admission has been denied. Despite your unique background and personal statement, your academic performance and standardized test scores do not meet our institutional standards." John's voice trailed off, but the damage was done. The scholarship the Harringtons had arranged, their final calculated move to maintain their charitable image while ensuring Leah stayed far from Boston, had been contingent on Harvard acceptance. Without it, her college dreams evaporated like steam from the espresso machine behind her. "I knew this would happen," Leah whispered, her voice barely audible over the morning rush of commuters grabbing their caffeine fixes. "The Harringtons probably called and told them exactly what kind of student I really am." "Don't." John's voice carried an edge she'd never heard before. In the 3 months since they'd left Beacon Hill, he'd worked 2 jobs while finishing his senior year at the local public school, his grades perfect despite the exhaustion etched in the dark circles under his eyes. "Don't let them make you smaller than you are." But the letter felt like a final verdict on her worth. Every tutor session that had ended in frustrated tears, every parent-teacher conference where she'd sat silent while adults discussed her learning disabilities, like she wasn't in the room, every time Richard Harrington had sighed when reviewing her report cards, it all crystallized into this single moment of institutional rejection. The bell above the cafe door chimed, and Leah's blood turned to ice water. Victoria Harrington glided through the entrance like a predator who'd finally cornered her prey, her designer coat spotless despite the February snow, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. "Leah, darling. How quaint to find you here." The other customers continued their conversations, oblivious to the fact that Leah's world had just tilted on its axis. She forced herself to stand straighter, to meet Victoria's gaze with something approaching dignity. "Mrs. Harrington, what brings you to this part of town?" "Oh, I was in the neighborhood visiting the community center we're funding." Victoria's eyes swept the modest cafe with barely concealed disdain. "We're launching a new initiative for disadvantaged youth, teaching them practical skills for realistic career paths." The insult was wrapped in charity speak, but its meaning was crystal clear. This was where people like Leah belonged, serving coffee to their betters, accepting their limitations. "I heard about Harvard," Victoria continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Such a shame. But honestly, dear, perhaps it's for the best. College isn't for everyone, especially those with challenges like yours." John stepped closer to Leah, his presence a wall of protective fury. "Actually, ma'am, Leah's been accepted to 3 other schools. Schools that recognize talent when they see it." It was true. State schools and community colleges had offered her spots, drawn by her personal essay about overcoming learning differences and her portfolio of fashion sketches. But Victoria's laugh was like breaking glass. "Community college?" She practically purred the words. "How wonderfully appropriate. Richard always said you needed to understand your place in the world." That's when the rage hit Leah like a physical force. Not the hot anger of the moment she'd been thrown out, but something colder, more calculating. For 3 months, she'd been mourning the loss of the Harringtons' approval, still seeking validation from people who had never seen her as more than a charity case with a convenient backstory for their social circle. But standing in this warm cafe where she'd learned to make perfect coffee art, surrounded by working-class customers who treated her with more respect than her adoptive parents ever had, she finally understood the truth. She had never needed their approval to be worthy of success. "You know what, Victoria?" Leah's voice was steady, almost conversational. "You're absolutely right. I do need to understand my place in the world." Victoria's smile widened, thinking she'd finally broken Leah completely. "My place," Leah continued, "is wherever I choose to put myself. And I choose to build something so successful, so undeniably brilliant, that you'll spend the rest of your life wondering how you could have been stupid enough to throw me away." The cafe fell silent. Even the espresso machine seemed to pause in respect for the moment that would later be remembered as the birth of an empire. Victoria's composed mask slipped for just an instant, revealing something that looked suspiciously like fear. "Leah, dear, you're being dramatic. What could someone like you possibly?" "Someone like me?" Leah stepped forward, and for the first time in her life, Victoria Harrington took a step backward. "Someone with fresh eyes who sees opportunities you're too stuck up to notice? Someone who understands what real people actually want to wear? Someone who knows what it feels like to be underestimated?" John's hand found the small of her back, a gentle reminder that she wasn't facing this alone. The touch sent strength coursing through her veins. "Let me paint you a picture," Leah said, her voice gaining power with each word. "In 5 years, you'll see my designs in every major department store. In 10 years, you'll be watching me on magazine covers, wondering if you can name-drop our family connection at your charity galas. And in 15 years... She paused, letting the promise hang in the air like a sword. "In 15 years, I'll be standing at your front door. Not begging to come home, but successful enough that you'll be the one hoping I'll forgive you for the biggest mistake of your pathetic, empty life." Victoria's face had gone pale beneath her expensive makeup. "You ungrateful little..." "The only thing I'm ungrateful for," Leah interrupted, "is the years I wasted trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it." She turned to John, whose eyes blazed with pride and something deeper, more dangerous. "We're done here. We have work to do." As they moved toward the door, Victoria's voice cracked like a whip across the cafe. "You'll never amount to anything. Do you hear me? You're damaged goods, Leah Conor. No one will ever invest in someone so fundamentally broken." Leah paused at the threshold, her hand on the door handle. When she looked back, her smile could have powered the entire city grid. "Watch me." Outside, the February air bit at their faces, but neither of them felt the cold. They walked in charged silence until they reached the bus stop, where John finally spoke. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I meant every word." Leah's voice shook, but with adrenaline rather than fear. "John, I'm going to build something incredible. Something that proves everyone who ever wrote me off was dead wrong." John corrected softly. "We're going to build something incredible." He pulled a folded newspaper from his jacket pocket, the classified section, marked with red circles around various job listings. But it was the headline that caught Leah's attention. "Local Fashion Week seeking emerging designers. Entry fee only $500. "I've been saving," John said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Every tip from the diner, every dollar from my weekend construction job. We're almost there, Leah. $500 away from your first real shot. The number might as well have been 5 million. Between rent, food, and basic survival, they barely scraped together enough each month to keep Estelle's lights on." But looking at John's face, bright with possibility, unmarked by the doubt that had plagued her moments before, Leah felt something shift inside her chest. "What if I fail?" she whispered. "Then we fail together, and we try again." John's hands framed her face, his thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize had started falling. "But Leah, what if you don't fail? What if you succeed beyond our wildest dreams? What if Victoria Harrington's worst nightmare comes true, and the girl she threw away becomes everything she never could be?" The kiss happened before either of them planned it. Soft at first, tentative, then deeper as 3 months of shared struggle and growing affection crystallized into something that felt like destiny. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, the world looked different somehow. More possible. "I love you," John whispered against her lips. "Not because you need saving, not because I pity you. I love you because you're the strongest, most brilliant person I've ever met, and watching you discover your own power is the greatest privilege of my life." "I love you too," she whispered back, and the words felt like a vow. "And I'm going to make you proud. You already have." As the bus rumbled toward them through the afternoon snow, Leah made a decision that would reshape not only her own future, but the entire fashion industry. She was going to enter that competition, even if it meant eating ramen for the next 2 months. She was going to show the world what happened when someone everyone had written off finally decided to write her own story. Behind them, somewhere in the warm cafe they'd left, Victoria Harrington sat alone at a corner table, her untouched latte growing cold as she stared out the window at the 2 young people boarding the bus. For the first time since she'd thrown Leah Conor out of her home, Victoria felt the smallest whisper of doubt. What if she'd made a mistake? But she pushed the thought away, just as she'd pushed away every uncomfortable truth about her own character for the past 43 years. Leah Conor was a damaged girl with learning problems and unrealistic dreams. In 6 months, she'd be just another cautionary tale about reaching beyond one's station. Victoria Harrington had no way of knowing that in exactly 15 years, 2 months, and 16 days, she would discover just how catastrophically wrong she had been. The sewing machine cost them their last $50 and looked like it had survived 2 world wars and a flood. Estelle had found it at a church rummage sale, its mechanical parts protesting with every stitch, but to Leah it might as well have been made of solid gold. "It skips every 3rd stitch," John observed, watching Leah wrestle with a piece of discounted fabric she'd bought from the remnant bin downtown. "Then I'll make every 3rd stitch by hand." Leah didn't look up from her work, her fingers moving with the precision of a surgeon despite the machine's rebellious tendencies. "I only need 3 pieces for the competition. 3 perfect pieces that'll make every fashion editor in Boston forget they ever heard the name Harrington." It had been 6 weeks since the confrontation at the cafe, and they were still $137 short of the entry fee. John had taken on a 3rd job, night security at a warehouse that paid cash under the table, which meant Leah barely saw him except when he collapsed onto the couch at dawn, exhausted but determined. She missed him with an ache that surprised her in its intensity. Their stolen moments together, a quick kiss before he left for work, fingers intertwined during Estelle's Sunday dinners, whispered conversations after his grandmother had gone to bed, felt more precious than any luxury she'd enjoyed in the Harrington mansion. "Leah, baby, you need to eat something." Estelle's voice carried the authority of a woman who had raised 7 children through various crises. She appeared with a plate of scrambled eggs and toast, setting it down beside the sewing machine with the kind of gentle insistence that brooked no argument. "I'm not hungry." It was a lie. Leah was always hungry these days, but food felt like a luxury they couldn't afford when every dollar needed to go toward the competition fund. "Child, you can't create beauty if you don't take care of the body that's doing the creating." Estelle settled into her chair with a grunt, her arthritic hands already reaching for the knitting that never seemed to leave her side. "Besides, Johnny would tan my hide if he came home to find you'd wasted away to nothing." The mention of John's name made Leah's chest tighten with a mixture of love and fear that had become her constant companion. He was sacrificing so much for her dreams, sleep, health, any semblance of a normal teenage life. What if she failed? What if all his faith in her turned out to be misplaced? "Estelle," Leah said carefully, not looking up from her stitching, "what if I'm not good enough? What if the Harringtons were right, and I'm just deluding myself?" The older woman's knitting needles stopped clicking, a sure sign that she was about to deliver one of her life-changing pieces of wisdom. "Let me tell you about my youngest boy, Jerome," Estelle began. "Everyone told him he was too small to play football, too slow to make the team. You know what he did?" Leah finally looked up, meeting Estelle's knowing eyes. "He practiced twice as hard as anybody else. Got up at 5 in the morning to run, stayed after school to lift weights, studied game films until his eyes bled. And you know what happened? He made the team. He became the coach." Estelle's smile could have lit up the entire apartment. "Sometimes, baby girl, The people who tell you that you can't are just showing you exactly what you need to prove wrong. Before Leah could respond, the apartment door burst open with enough force to rattle the windows. John stood in the doorway, his security uniform wrinkled, and his eyes blazing with an excitement that made her heart skip. "We did it," he gasped, pulling a crumpled envelope from his pocket. "Leah, we did it." She dropped the fabric she'd been working on, afraid to hope. "Did what?" $500. His grin could have powered the entire city. Plus an extra 50 for materials. "I won the warehouse safety bonus, 3 months without an incident, and the supervisor gave out cash prizes to the whole night crew." The money felt surreal in her hands. More cash than she'd seen in one place since leaving Beacon Hill. But it was John's face that made her throat tighten with emotion. He looked like he'd just handed her the moon, and in a way he had. "John, this is your money. You earned it working jobs that are slowly killing you." "Our money," he corrected, crossing the room to pull her into his arms. "Our dream, our partnership, our future. I didn't earn this for me, Leah. I earned it for us." The kiss was desperate and celebrating and terrified all at once. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Leah realized that tears were streaming down her face. "I'm scared," she whispered against his lips. "What if I embarrass myself? What if I'm not as good as we think I am? Then you'll be not as good in front of the most important people in the fashion industry, which is still better than being not as good in obscurity." John's thumb traced the line of her cheek, wiping away her tears. "But Leah, you are that good. You're better than good. You're revolutionary. How can you be so sure?" "Because I've watched you design clothes for Mrs. Chun at the laundromat that made her cry with joy. Because you redesigned Estelle's church dress and turned her into the belle of Sunday service. Because every sketch in your book solves a problem that fashion designers with fancy degrees haven't even noticed exists." It was true. In the past 6 weeks, word had spread through their neighborhood that Leah could work magic with fabric and thread. Women had started approaching her with their problems. Church dresses that needed to be modern but modest, work uniforms that needed to be professional but comfortable, prom dresses that needed to be stunning but affordable. Each challenge had sparked something creative in her mind, and each successful creation had built her confidence piece by piece. But competing at Boston Fashion Week felt like jumping from sketching in a notebook to designing for the Met Gala. "There's something else," John said, his voice carrying a note of carefully controlled excitement. "I talked to my supervisor about you. About what you're doing." Leah's stomach dropped. "John, you didn't." His wife owns a boutique in Cambridge. High-end stuff, but she's been looking for fresh talent. Someone who understands fashion, but isn't stuck in the same old patterns. John's eyes were bright with possibility. "If you place in the top 3 at Fashion Week, she wants to meet with you. Talk about maybe carrying some of your pieces." The room seemed to spin around her. A real boutique, with real customers who had real money to spend on clothes that weren't made in her grandmother's living room with a temperamental sewing machine. "Top 3, she repeated numbly. "Out of how many designers?" 57 entered this year. The number hit her like a physical blow. 57 designers, many of whom probably had formal training, established reputations, and budgets that made her $500 look like pocket change. "I can't compete with that," she whispered. "I'm a high school dropout with a learning disability and a broken sewing machine." "No." John's voice was sharp enough to cut through her spiral of self-doubt. "You're a visionary who sees what fashion could be instead of what it's always been. You're an innovator who solves problems instead of just making pretty clothes for rich people. You're the person who's going to change everything." Estelle had been listening to this exchange with the patience of someone who had weathered many storms. But now she set down her knitting with decisive finality. "Both of you sit down. It's time for some truth-telling." They obeyed without question. Estelle's truth-telling sessions were legendary in their household. "Leah, baby girl, fear is just excitement wearing a disguise. Every great thing that's ever been accomplished started with someone being scared out of their mind, but doing it anyway." Her weathered hands gestured toward the sketches spread across the coffee table. "You think Coco Chanel wasn't scared when she decided to put women in pants? You think Vera Wang wasn't scared when she started designing wedding dresses at 40? Fear don't mean you're not ready. It means you're about to do something important." She turned to John with the look that had shaped him from boyhood into the man Leah had fallen in love with. And you, Johnny, stop trying to carry this girl's dreams for her. Love her enough to let her be scared, let her doubt, let her find her own strength. Your job isn't to convince her she's amazing. It's to stand beside her while she proves it to herself. The apartment fell silent except for the distant sounds of the neighborhood settling into evening. Leah looked at the money in her hands, then at the designs scattered around her, then at John's face, tired but determined, scared but unwavering in his faith in their shared future. Okay, she said finally. Okay, let's do this thing. Let's show Boston what happens when you bet against someone with nothing left to lose. John's smile was answer enough, but he kissed her anyway, soft and sweet and full of promises neither of them was old enough to fully understand, but both were brave enough to make. 2 weeks later, the rejection letter arrived. Not from the Fashion Week organizers. That acceptance had come through without incident, along with information about setup times and judging criteria that made Leah's stomach churn with anxiety. This rejection came from Boston University's financial aid office, denying John's application for emergency assistance with his final semester's tuition. Without that aid, he couldn't graduate. Without graduation, he couldn't qualify for the management training program he'd been accepted to at a downtown hotel. The job that would have provided them with stable income while Leah built her fashion career. It's fine, John said, but his voice sounded hollow. I'll figure something else out. Maybe community college part-time while I keep working security. But Leah could see the defeat in his shoulders, the way his dreams were crumbling just as hers were beginning to take shape. He'd sacrificed everything for her vision of their future, and now his own future was slipping away. That night, as John slept the exhausted sleep of someone working 3 jobs, Leah made a decision that would haunt her for the next 15 years. She counted out $300 from their Fashion Week fund, money that was supposed to pay for professional photography of her pieces, for a proper portfolio, for the kind of presentation that might actually catch judges' attention. Instead, she tucked it into an envelope with John's name on it, along with a note that simply said, "For your education, your dreams matter too." She never told him about the sacrifice. When he found the money and tried to refuse it, she lied and said Estelle had secret savings she wanted to contribute to his future. She watched him agonize over taking what he believed was charity from his grandmother, never knowing it was actually the last of their competition budget. 2 weeks later, Leah Conor walked into Boston Fashion Week with $50 worth of fabric, a borrowed camera phone for documentation, and 3 designs that represented everything she understood about beauty, resilience, and the power of clothes to transform not just appearance, but identity. She had no way of knowing that her sacrifice would turn out to be the most important investment she'd ever made, or that John's education would provide the business foundation for an empire that would one day make Victoria Harrington weep with regret. All she knew was that love sometimes meant making choices that broke your heart in the moment, but proved their worth over a lifetime. The competition was 3 days away. Boston Fashion Week buzzed with the energy of 100 ambitious dreams colliding in one converted warehouse space. Leah stood at the entrance clutching her garment bag like a lifeline, watching designers with rolling racks of professionally pressed clothes and teams of assistants navigate the controlled chaos with practiced ease. She had 3 pieces. No team, no professional photography, and a stomach full of butterflies that felt more like angry wasps. Leah Conor? A harried-looking woman with a clipboard and the kind of severe haircut that screamed fashion industry approached her with barely concealed impatience. "You're late for check-in." "Sorry, the bus was delayed, and I couldn't find the right entrance. Your setup space is B47, near the back corner. You have 2 hours until judging begins." The woman's eyes swept over Leah's modest appearance with unconcealed disappointment. "I assume your styling team is running behind?" "Styling team?" The woman's expression shifted from impatience to something approaching pity. "Honey, please tell me you at least have professional photographs of your pieces? The judges need portfolio documentation for preliminary review." The borrowed phone in Leah's pocket suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She'd taken photos of her designs on Estelle's fire escape, using natural light and sheer determination to make $50 fabric look like something worthy of a runway. "I have photos," she said quietly. "Good. Get set up quickly. The judges start their walkthrough in 90 minutes, and first impressions are everything in this business. As the woman clicked away on intimidating heels, Leah made her way to setup space B47, which turned out to be exactly what it sounded like. A corner spot near the loading dock, where the scent of diesel fuel competed with expensive perfumes, and the sound of forklifts occasionally drowned out conversations about market positioning and brand identity. She was hanging her first piece, a dress that transformed from professional day wear to elegant evening attire with the simple adjustment of a detachable overlay, when she heard a voice that made her blood turn to ice water. "My God, is that little Leah Conor?" Victoria Harrington emerged from behind a neighboring display like a perfectly dressed nightmare, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. She wasn't alone. Richard stood beside her, uncomfortable but present, and with them was a woman Leah didn't recognize but whose expensive clothes and predatory expression marked her as someone from their world. "Victoria." Leah's voice came out steadier than she felt. "What are you doing here?" "Darling, we're patrons of the arts. When we heard about this charming little competition, we simply had to come see what Boston's emerging talent looks like." Victoria's eyes swept over Leah's modest setup with barely concealed amusement. "Though I must say, I expected something more substantial from someone making such bold claims about their future." The woman with them stepped forward, extending a manicured hand that sparkled with diamonds. "I'm Helena Blackwood, editor-in-chief of Boston Style magazine. Victoria was just telling me the most fascinating story about your background." Leah's heart sank. Helena Blackwood was a legend in fashion journalism, known for making or breaking careers with a single review. If Victoria had gotten to her first, had poisoned the well with stories about Leah's learning disabilities and ungrateful behavior. "Such a shame about the dyslexia," Helena continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Victoria explained how hard your family tried to help you overcome your challenges. It must be so difficult, trying to compete in an industry that requires such attention to detail when you struggle with basic reading comprehension." The words hit Leah like physical blows, each one designed to undermine her confidence at the worst possible moment. Around them, other designers were making final adjustments to displays that looked like art installations compared to her humble corner setup. "Of course," Victoria added with the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "We're rooting for you, dear. It would be such an inspiration if someone with your limitations could find some small measure of success." That's when Leah saw him. John, emerging from the crowd with 2 cups of coffee and murder in his eyes. He'd heard every word. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the kind of respect that was actually an insult, "I think you might be confused about something." Victoria turned toward him with the expression she reserved for service workers who had forgotten their place. "Excuse me? You said Leah has limitations." John set down the coffee cups with deliberate care, then moved to stand beside the dress Leah had been hanging. "But what I see here is someone who designed a piece that solves 3 different problems fashion's been ignoring for decades." He gestured to the dress with the reverence of someone presenting a masterpiece. "This dress? It goes from a business meeting to a dinner date to a night out with nothing more than a 30-second adjustment. No woman has to choose between looking professional and feeling beautiful anymore. That's not limitation, that's innovation." Helena's eyebrows rose slightly, the first sign of genuine interest she'd shown. "Interesting concept. But the real genius," John continued, his voice gaining strength as he moved to Leah's second piece, "is this." The second design was a work uniform that had kept Leah up for 3 straight nights. She'd solved the problem that plagued every working woman she knew: how to look professional and competent while still being able to move, bend, and actually do your job without constantly adjusting your clothes. This uniform incorporates hidden stretch panels that activate only when needed, strategic placement of pockets that don't disrupt the silhouette, and fabric choices that resist stains while maintaining a polished appearance. John's business education was evident in every word. He spoke their language, used their terminology, made Leah's intuitive genius sound like calculated brilliance. But it was when he reached the third piece that his voice took on an emotional resonance that made everyone in their corner of the warehouse stop and listen. "And this," he said, his hand hovering just above the fabric without touching it, This is what happens when someone who's been told she's not enough decides to create something for every other person who's ever felt the same way. The third design was Leah's masterpiece. A dress that could be adjusted to flatter virtually any body type, made from affordable fabric, but designed with couture-level attention to detail. It was beautiful, accessible, and revolutionary in its inclusivity. It's not about the money you have or the size you wear or the background you come from, John continued, his eyes never leaving Leah's face. It's about feeling worthy of beauty. It's about clothes that celebrate who you are instead of trying to hide what you're not. The corner of the warehouse had fallen completely silent. Even the sounds of setup seemed muted, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Helena Blackwood stepped closer to examine the pieces, her practiced eye taking in details that had escaped Victoria's dismissive glance. When she spoke, her voice carried a note of genuine surprise. "These techniques, where did you study?" "I didn't," Leah said quietly. "Everything I know, I taught myself." "Impossible." But Helena's tone suggested she was beginning to believe otherwise. The construction on this evening, where transformation alone requires master-level understanding of pattern manipulation and fabric behavior. That's when the revelation hit like lightning striking the same place twice. A voice from across the warehouse cut through the crowd noise with the authority of someone used to commanding attention. "Excuse me, is this the Conor collection?" The crowd parted to reveal a woman in her 60s, elegantly dressed, but with the kind of practical bearing that suggested substance over style. Leah didn't recognize her, but everyone else in their corner suddenly looked like they'd seen a ghost. "Sophia Chun," Helena breathed, and the reverence in her voice was unmistakable. Sophia Chun. The Sophia Chun. Legendary fashion designer, founder of the Chun Dynasty fashion house, the woman who had been called the most influential designer of her generation before mysteriously retiring at the height of her career 15 years earlier. "I've been watching your setup from across the room," Sophia said, her voice carrying a slight accent that spoke of cosmopolitan elegance. "These pieces, who taught you to manipulate fabric like this?" "No one," Leah whispered, still not quite believing that Sophia Chun was standing in her setup space, examining her amateur hour presentation like it contained treasures. "Show me your hands." The request was so unexpected that Leah complied without thinking, extending her hands palm up for inspection. Sophia took them gently, turning them over to examine her fingertips with the concentration of someone reading a map. "You stitch by hand when the machine fails you," Sophia observed. "I can see the calluses from the needle, the slight staining from fabric dye. You don't just design clothes, you build them yourself, every seam, every hem." "Ah, yes, ma'am." Sophia's smile transformed her entire face. 23 years ago, I was where you are now. A young woman with no formal training, no connections, and nothing but raw talent and desperate determination. Do you know what stopped me from achieving everything I dreamed of? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, the warehouse had resumed its buzzing activity, but their corner remained frozen in this moment of potential revelation. "I let other people define my limitations," Sophia continued. "I let them convince me that someone like me could never compete with the established houses, could never break through the barriers that kept people like us on the outside looking in." Her eyes found Victoria's face with laser precision. "I let people who had never created anything beautiful convince me that I wasn't worthy of success." The insult was delivered with such elegant precision that it took Victoria a moment to realize she'd been eviscerated. When understanding dawned, her face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and rage. "I beg your pardon, but I hardly think. You think she's limited by dyslexia?" Sophia's laugh was like silver bells ringing. "Child, some of the most innovative minds in fashion history have been neurodivergent. We see patterns differently, think in ways that break conventional rules. What you call limitation, we call advantage." She turned back to Leah with an intensity that made the world narrow to just this moment, just this conversation that would change everything. "I retired from active design 15 years ago, but I've been looking for someone worthy of carrying on my legacy. Someone who understands that fashion isn't just about clothes, it's about helping people see their own worth." Sophia's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I think I just found her." The warehouse seemed to spin around Leah like she was caught in the eye of a hurricane. Sophia Chun wanted to mentor her. Victoria Harrington looked like she'd been struck by lightning. Helena Blackwood was frantically taking notes. And John? John was watching her with the kind of pride that made her feel like she could conquer the entire world. There's just one condition, Sophia continued, her smile taking on a mysterious quality. Win this competition first. Show them what someone with limitations can accomplish when she stops apologizing for being different and starts celebrating what makes her extraordinary. As if summoned by her words, the announcement echoed across the warehouse. Attention designers, judging begins in 15 minutes. Please make final adjustments to your presentations. Leah looked at her 3 pieces, humble compared to the elaborate displays surrounding them, but suddenly radiant with possibility. She thought about Victoria's cruel words, about the years of being told she wasn't enough, about John's unwavering faith and Sophia Chen's unexpected blessing. Then she thought about every woman who had ever looked in a mirror and wished she could see someone worthy of love looking back. I'm going to win, she said quietly, and the words felt like a vow. I know you are, Sophia replied. And when you do, we have work to do. As the judges began their walkthrough, starting with the prestigious spaces near the entrance, Leah Conor prepared to show the fashion world what happened when someone everyone had written off decided to write her own ending. The girl they'd thrown away was about to become impossible to ignore. The judges never made it to set up space B47. Leah watched from her corner as they moved methodically through the warehouse, spending careful minutes at each display, their clipboards filling with notes that would determine someone's future. She tracked their progress like a death row inmate watching the clock, 20 spaces from her corner, then 15, then 10. Then they stopped. Ladies and gentlemen, the head judge's voice crackled through the warehouse sound system. Due to time constraints, we'll be concluding our preliminary review here. Thank you to all participants. The words hit Leah like a physical blow. Around her, the designers in the back corner, the ones who couldn't afford premium placement, the ones who'd scraped together entry fees and prayed for miracles, began packing their dreams back into garment bags with the resigned efficiency of people accustomed to disappointment. This isn't over, John said fiercely, but his voice carried the hollow ring of someone trying to convince himself. Sophia Chen saw your work. She knows what you're capable of. Sophia Chen saw 3 dresses hanging in a corner, Leah interrupted, her voice flat with defeat. She doesn't know me. She doesn't owe me anything. And now she never will, because the judges didn't even. She couldn't finish the sentence. Across the warehouse, she could see the winner's circle forming around the designers whose spaces had been visited, whose work had been deemed worthy of consideration. Victoria Harrington stood among them like a queen holding court, her smile visible even from a distance. Miss Conor, a young man in an official Boston Fashion Week t-shirt approached their setup with the apologetic expression of someone delivering bad news. I'm sorry, but you'll need to clear your space within the hour. The venue has another event this evening. Leah nodded numbly, beginning to fold the dress that would have revolutionized how working women approached professional wear. It felt like folding up dreams themselves, creasing them small enough to fit back into the life everyone had always told her she deserved. Leah. Sophia Chen's voice cut through her spiral of despair like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. The legendary designer stood at the edge of their setup space, her expression unreadable. Walk with me. They moved through the warehouse in silence, past the celebrating designers and their teams, past the judges who were already focused on the next phase of competition, past Victoria Harrington, whose triumphant expression flickered with uncertainty as she watched them pass. Sophia led her to a quiet corner near the loading dock, where the late afternoon sun slanted through high windows and created a pool of golden light that felt almost sacred. You're disappointed, Sophia said. It wasn't a question. I'm realistic, Leah replied, though the words tasted like ash in her mouth. This whole thing was stupid. I'm a high school dropout with a learning disability and $50 worth of fabric. What made me think I could compete with people who've been training for this their whole lives? The same thing that made me think I could compete with the established fashion houses when I was your age, Sophia said quietly. Desperation, determination, and the kind of raw talent that comes along once in a generation. Talent doesn't matter if no one sees it. Oh, but they did see it. Sophia's smile was mysterious, almost mischievous. Leah, Do you really think I just happened to wander over to your setup space by accident? Do you think I randomly decided to examine the work of some unknown designer in the back corner? Leah's heart began to beat faster, though she didn't dare hope. I've been watching you since you walked through those doors, Sophia continued. I saw you hang each piece with the care of someone who understands that clothes aren't just fabric and thread, they're possibilities. I watched you explain your designs to that pompous woman and her companions, and I saw something in your work that I haven't seen in 20 years of reviewing fashion portfolios. But the judges, Sophia interrupted with a dismissive wave, are looking for marketable competence. Safe choices that will generate adequate returns for established brands. They're not looking for revolution. She moved closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I am. The words hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. But before Leah could respond, John's voice cut through the moment with panic-edged urgency. Leah, you need to see this. He was running toward them, his phone clutched in his hand, his face pale with something that looked like shock. Behind him, Estelle moved as quickly as her arthritic joints would allow, her expression grim. What's wrong? Leah asked, though she already knew that whatever John was about to tell her would shatter what remained of this impossible day. It's everywhere, he said, holding up his phone. Every social media platform, every fashion blog. Someone recorded your conversation with Victoria Harrington and Helena Blackwood. Leah's stomach plummeted. What conversation? But even as she asked, she knew. The moment when Victoria had publicly humiliated her about her dyslexia, when Helena had repeated every cruel thing Victoria had said about her limitations and ungrateful behavior. Someone had been recording, and now the entire fashion world was watching her be torn down by the woman who had thrown her away. It gets worse, John continued, his voice barely steady. They're calling it Fashion Week drama. Adopted charity case claims she's the next big thing. The comments. Leah, the comments are brutal. She took his phone with trembling hands, scrolling through responses that felt like virtual stones being thrown at her dreams. Typical entitled behavior from someone who's never had to work for anything. Dyslexic designer? How is she supposed to read contracts or understand industry standards? Victoria Harrington is a saint for putting up with this kind of ingratitude. Someone should tell this girl that not everyone gets to be special. The cruelest comments came with thousands of likes, thousands of shares, spreading her humiliation across the internet like wildfire. Every insecurity she'd ever felt about her learning differences, every moment of self-doubt about her worthiness, was being validated by strangers who felt qualified to judge her life based on a 60-second video clip. There's more, Estelle said quietly, her weathered hands reaching for Leah's shoulders. That woman, Victoria, she gave an interview to some reporter. Said you were always troubled, always difficult. Made it sound like they tried everything to help you, but you were just too broken to be fixed. The word broken hit Leah like a physical blow. It was the word that had haunted her through every failed tutoring session, every accommodation that hadn't worked, every moment when her brain simply refused to process letters the way everyone else's did. They're saying I'm using my learning disability for sympathy, Leah whispered, still scrolling through the endless stream of judgment. They're saying I'm trying to get ahead by playing victim. Leah, Sophia said sharply, but her voice seemed to come from very far away. The phone slipped from Leah's numb fingers, clattering to the concrete floor. Around her, the warehouse continued its activity. Designers packing up, organizers coordinating the next phase of competition, industry professionals networking and making deals that would shape careers. But for Leah Conor, the world had narrowed to this single, devastating truth. She had been reduced to a viral moment of humiliation, a cautionary tale about knowing one's place, a reminder that some people were born to dream and others were born to serve. I need to go, she said, her voice barely audible. Leah, wait. John reached for her, but she was already moving, pushing through the crowd with the desperate energy of someone fleeing a fire. She made it to the warehouse bathroom before the tears came, great, gasping sobs that felt like they were tearing her apart from the inside. In the cracked mirror above the sink, she saw exactly what Victoria Harrington and thousands of internet strangers saw. A broken girl who had reached too far above her station and gotten exactly what she deserved. The bathroom door opened, and she expected to see John or Estelle, come to comfort her with words that would feel hollow in the face of such public devastation. Instead, Victoria Harrington walked in, her smile sharp as a knife. "Oh, darling," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I heard about the video. How absolutely mortifying for you." Leah turned to face her former adoptive mother, and for the first time in her life, she felt something colder than hurt, deeper than anger. She felt hatred. "You did this on purpose," she said quietly. "Did what, dear? Tell the truth about your background. Share my genuine concerns about your challenges." Victoria moved closer, and Leah caught the scent of her expensive perfume. The same fragrance that had once meant safety and home, now tainted with the poison of betrayal. "I'm simply trying to protect the fashion industry from someone who isn't equipped to succeed in it. You're trying to destroy me." "Oh, sweetheart." Victoria's laugh was like breaking crystal. "You don't need my help to destroy yourself. You've done a perfectly adequate job of that all on your own." She turned to leave, then paused at the door, her hand on the handle. "I tried to spare you this humiliation by keeping you away from worlds where you don't belong. But you insisted on embarrassing yourself publicly." Her voice carried the finality of a judge delivering a verdict. "Perhaps now you'll finally understand what Richard and I tried to teach you all those years. Some people are born to greatness, and others are born to serve those who are. There's no shame in accepting your place in the natural order." The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like the final nail in a coffin. Leah stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror, seeing not a revolutionary designer or a young woman with unlimited potential, but exactly what Victoria had always seen. A charity case who had forgotten her place and gotten exactly what she deserved. Outside the bathroom, she could hear John calling her name, his voice growing more frantic with each unanswered call. Soon he would find her, and he would try to convince her that this wasn't the end, that they could recover from this public humiliation, that love was enough to overcome anything. But standing in that dingy bathroom, watching her dreams crumble in real time across social media, Leah Conor made a decision that would haunt both of them for the next 15 years. She was going to disappear. Not just from Boston Fashion Week, not just from the fashion industry that had rejected her so publicly and completely, but from John's life. He deserved better than to be dragged down by association with someone the entire world now saw as a failure and a fraud. He deserved a future that wasn't anchored to her sinking ship of broken dreams. Through the thin bathroom walls, she could hear Sophia Chen's voice, talking rapidly to someone, probably trying to manage the crisis, trying to salvage something from the wreckage of what had started as a day full of impossible promise. But it was too late for salvage. Some things, once broken, couldn't be repaired. Leah Conor had learned that lesson in the most public, most humiliating way possible. The girl who had once promised to build an empire was about to vanish into the shadows, leaving behind only the viral video of her destruction and the echo of Victoria Harrington's cruel laughter. Rock bottom has a basement, and Leah just found it. With her dreams in ashes and her spirit crushed, can anything pull her back from the brink? Sometimes the darkest hour comes just before the dawn. Leah was 3 blocks from the warehouse when she heard the footsteps behind her. Not the heavy, determined stride of John searching for her, but the measured click of expensive heels on pavement. She didn't need to turn around to know who had followed her into the Boston twilight. Running away again? Sophia Chen's voice carried no judgment, only weary understanding. "I did the same thing at your age. Packed my dreams into a suitcase and disappeared for 6 months, convinced that humiliation was permanent and talent meant nothing in the face of cruelty." Leah stopped walking but didn't turn around. Did it work? The running away? For a while. Sophia moved to stand beside her, both women facing the city skyline that sparkled with the promise of futures neither of them felt equipped to claim. "I told myself I was being practical, accepting reality, choosing dignity over delusion. I got a job in a factory, making other people's designs, convincing myself that being anonymous was safer than being visible." The autumn wind carried the scent of coffee and exhaust fumes, the everyday smell of a city where millions of dreams lived and died every day. "What changed?" Leah asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. Hope was more dangerous than despair. It made you vulnerable to disappointment. "My grandmother." Sophia's smile was visible in her voice. "She appeared at my factory job one day, tiny and furious, with a newspaper clipping in her hand. Someone had won a design competition using a technique I'd developed but never pursued. She slapped that clipping down on my workstation and said, "While you're hiding from failure, someone else is stealing your future." Leah finally turned to face her, seeing something in Sophia's expression that looked like recognition. Not just of talent, but of the specific kind of pain that came from being told you weren't enough. "The video," Leah said quietly. "You saw it. Everyone saw it. Which means everyone also saw something Victoria Harrington didn't count on." Sophia pulled out her phone, scrolling to something that made her smile with satisfaction. "They saw you refuse to back down when challenged. They saw you articulate your vision with passion and intelligence. They saw a young woman who understood fashion in ways that formal education can't teach." She handed Leah the phone, and what she saw made her breath catch in her throat. The video was there, yes, but it wasn't alone. Someone had edited together clips from throughout the day, showing Leah explaining her designs to curious onlookers, demonstrating the transformative elements of her pieces, speaking with the kind of natural expertise that came from solving real problems rather than following established patterns. But more importantly, the comments had changed. Wait, did she just solve the biggest problem in professional wear with one dress? Why isn't this in stores already? I'm a working mom, and I would pay serious money for clothes that actually work for real life. That uniform design is genius. Finally, someone who understands what we actually need. Dyslexic designer? So what? Some of the most innovative minds think differently. That's what makes them innovative. Victoria Harrington sounds like every boss who's ever tried to keep talented people down. This girl is going places. There are thousands of them, Sophia said quietly. Women who saw themselves in your designs, who recognize solutions to problems they live with every day. Fashion editors who understand the difference between marketable competence and revolutionary thinking. Leah scrolled through comment after comment, watching her humiliation transform into something entirely different. Validation, support, recognition from people who understood what she was trying to create. Helena Blackwood posted a follow-up article an hour ago, Sophia continued. Titled, "The Designer Everyone's Talking About. Why Fashion Week's Biggest Story Happened in the Back Corner." She's calling you the most important emerging voice in accessible luxury design. The phone trembled in Leah's hands. "I don't understand. The judges never even." "The judges," Sophia interrupted with a dismissive wave, "are the past. Social media, viral videos, public response. That's the future of fashion marketing. You just got more exposure in 4 hours than most designers get in 4 years. She paused, studying Leah's face with the intensity of someone reading a map to buried treasure. "There's something else. 3 boutique owners have reached out through my contacts, wanting to know if you're taking orders. A textile company in California sent samples, hoping to collaborate. And," she smiled like someone about to deliver the world's best surprise. Anna Winter's assistant called. The name hit Leah like lightning. Anna Winter. The Anna Winter, whose opinion could make or break careers, whose approval was the golden ticket to fashion immortality. "She wants to see your portfolio," Sophia continued. "Full collection, design philosophy, business plan. She's interested in featuring emerging designers who represent the future of inclusive fashion." Leah stared at the phone screen, watching her life transform in real time through retweets and shares and comments from people who saw her not as a charity case with delusions of grandeur, but as exactly what she'd always believed herself to be. Someone who could change how the world thought about beauty, accessibility, and worth. "But I don't have a full collection," she whispered. "I don't have a business plan. I don't even have money for fabric." "No," Sophia agreed, "but you have something more valuable. You have a vision that solves real problems and the talent to execute it. Everything else can be built." She reached into her purse, pulling out a business card that felt like it was made of dreams and possibilities. Qin Dynasty Designs has been dormant for 15 years, but it never officially closed. The manufacturing relationships, the business infrastructure, the connections, it's all still there, waiting for the right person to bring it back to life. Sophia's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I want that person to be you." The offer hung in the air between them like a bridge across the chasm between what was and what could be. Leah looked at the business card, then at Sophia's face, then back at the phone screen where her future was being written in real time by strangers who believed in her potential. What about John? The question slipped out before she could stop it, her heart still anchored to the young man who had sacrificed everything to help her reach this moment. What about him? He deserves better than to be dragged down by someone who comes with this much drama. The video, the controversy, Victoria's lies. Leah. Sophia's voice carried the sharp crack of someone who had spent decades cutting through other people's self-destructive nonsense. That young man just defended your work with the kind of passion and expertise that most designers pay publicists thousands of dollars to fake. He didn't see someone who needed saving. He saw a partner whose success he wanted to champion. She was right. Even in Leah's darkest moment, watching her dreams crumble in real time, John had been thinking about how to rebuild them, how to turn crisis into opportunity, how to protect what they'd built together. Success without the people who love you isn't success, Sophia continued. It's just expensive loneliness. Trust me, I spent 15 years learning that lesson the hard way. As if summoned by their conversation, Leah heard her name being called from the direction of the warehouse. John's voice, hoarse with worry and determination, cutting through the city noise like a beacon calling her home. He's been looking for you since you disappeared, Sophia observed. Estelle is coordinating a search party. Half the neighborhood is probably on their way here to help find you. The image of John refusing to give up on her, of Estelle mobilizing an army of people who believed in her worth, made something shift in Leah's chest. The darkness that had threatened to swallow her whole began to crack, letting in slivers of light. I was going to disappear, she admitted. Leave Boston, change my name, start over somewhere nobody knew about the video or the humiliation. And let Victoria Harrington win? The question hit like a slap, jarring and necessary. Leah thought about Victoria's cruel smile in the bathroom, her satisfaction at having finally put Leah back in her place, her certainty that some people were born to serve and others were born to rule. She's counting on you giving up, Sophia continued. She's banking on your shame being stronger than your ambition, your fear being louder than your dreams. Every day you spend hiding is another day she gets to be right about you. John's voice was getting closer, and with it came the sound of other voices. Estelle calling her name, neighbors who had joined the search, people who had chosen to spend their evening looking for someone they cared about instead of watching from the sidelines. What if I fail? Leah whispered, the question that had haunted her since childhood finally spoken aloud. What if Victoria is right, and I'm just not built for success? Then you'll fail while trying to build something beautiful instead of failing while hiding from the possibility of greatness. Sophia's smile was fierce and beautiful and utterly uncompromising. But Leah, you're not going to fail. You're going to succeed so completely, so undeniably, that 15 years from now, Victoria Harrington will lie awake at night wondering how she could have been stupid enough to throw away someone who became everything she never could be. The prophecy hung in the air between them like a promise written in starlight. Leah! John rounded the corner at a dead run, his face transformed with relief when he saw her standing safely on the sidewalk. Behind him came Estelle, moving as fast as her arthritis would allow, and behind her a small army of neighbors who had dropped everything to search for someone they had claimed as family. Thank God, John gasped, pulling her into his arms with the desperate strength of someone who had thought he'd lost everything that mattered. When you disappeared, I thought maybe the video had convinced you that we weren't worth fighting for. Never, Leah whispered against his chest, feeling the solid reality of his heartbeat, the warmth of his arms, the strength of someone who had never once wavered in his faith in their shared future. I was scared, but never that. When they broke apart, John's eyes found Sophia Chun, still standing with the patient dignity of someone who had learned to wait for the right moment. Ma'am, he said, his voice carrying the respect of someone who recognized greatness. I don't know what you said to her, but thank you. I didn't say anything she didn't already know, Sophia replied. I just reminded her that sometimes the biggest risk isn't failing. It's succeeding beyond your wildest dreams and having to live up to the person that success makes you become. She turned to Leah with the expression of someone making a final offer. Chun Dynasty Designs. Full partnership. Your vision, my infrastructure. 15 years of connections and experience at your disposal. Her smile could have lit up the entire city. Are you ready to show the world what happens when someone they wrote off decides to write her own ending? Leah looked at John's face, blazing with pride and possibility. At Estelle, whose weathered hands held more love than all of Victoria's money could buy. At the neighbors who had spent their evenings searching for someone they barely knew, but had chosen to care about anyway. Then she thought about Victoria Harrington, probably celebrating her victory at some expensive restaurant, convinced she had finally put Leah Conor in her place permanently. Yes, Leah said, and the word felt like a declaration of war against everyone who had ever underestimated her. Let's build an empire. The turning point had arrived, and with it, the beginning of a story that would end with Victoria Harrington kneeling at the very gates where she had once cast Leah aside. 15 years later, the black Tesla pulled up to the wrought iron gates of 47, Beacon Hill Avenue at exactly 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that Victoria Harrington would remember for the rest of her life. The car was silent, expensive, and familiar in a way that made her stomach clench with something she refused to acknowledge as fear. She knew that car. She'd seen it in countless magazine spreads, parked outside fashion weeks in Paris and Milan, featured in Forbes articles about young entrepreneurs who had revolutionized entire industries. It belonged to Leah Conor, or rather, to the woman Leah Conor had become. Victoria pressed her face to the window of the mansion she could no longer afford to heat properly, watching as the car door opened with the whisper-quiet precision of German engineering. The woman who emerged moved with the fluid confidence of someone who had learned to command rooms full of people who used to intimidate her. Leah Conor at 30 was nothing like the broken girl who had knelt on these same marble steps 15 years ago. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant crown that spoke of both heritage and high fashion. Her clothes were clearly custom-made, but somehow still accessible, and she carried herself with the kind of understated power that came from knowing you could buy and sell everyone around you without breaking a sweat. But it was her companion who made Victoria's blood turn to ice water. John McClane stepped out of the passenger side with the easy grace of someone who had grown into his own power alongside hers. The 18-year-old janitor had become a man who wore a perfectly tailored suit like armor, whose MBA from Harvard Business School had been paid for by the woman he'd never stopped believing in, whose wedding ring caught the afternoon light with the kind of casual flash that spoke of security beyond imagination. They stood at the gates for a moment, not speaking, just looking up at the mansion that had once represented everything Leah had lost and everything she'd been told she could never have. "Mrs. Harrington?" The voice came from behind Victoria, making her jump. Sarah, the last remaining member of her household staff. The others had been let go months ago when the money ran out. Stood in the doorway with the nervous expression of someone delivering news she knew wouldn't be well received. "There are people at the gate. They're asking to speak with you." Victoria smoothed her hair, adjusted her clothes, and tried to summon the imperious dignity that had once made servants scramble and social climbers grovel. But the truth was harder to hide these days. The designer clothes were years old. The jewelry was paste reproductions of pieces she'd been forced to sell, and the mansion itself was mortgaged to the hilt and 3 months behind on payments. Richard was gone, had been for 2 years now, taken by a heart attack that came when the lawsuits started and the business empire built on other people's work began to crumble. He died still refusing to admit that their greatest mistake hadn't been adopting Leah Conor, but throwing her away. "Tell them I'm not receiving visitors," Victoria said, though her voice lacked its old authority. "Ma'am," Sarah said carefully, "I think you should see this." She held up her phone, and Victoria's world tilted on its axis. The screen showed a news alert from Boston Business Journal. Conor Dynasty CEO returns to Boston for major announcement. Sources suggest Harrington estate acquisition in the works. Conor Dynasty. The fashion empire that had risen from nothing to challenge the oldest, most established houses in the industry. The company that had started with 3 dresses sewn in a Roxbury apartment and grown into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise that dressed everyone from working mothers to movie stars to European royalty. The company owned by the girl Victoria had thrown away like garbage. "She can't possibly." Victoria's voice trailed off as the reality hit her like a physical blow. The mortgage payments. The estate's financial troubles. The discreet inquiries from corporate lawyers about the property's availability. Leah Conor hadn't come back to beg for forgiveness or closure. She'd come back to buy the house. Through the window, Victoria watched as John approached the intercom system with the confident stride of someone who had never forgotten what it felt like to be dismissed as the help. When he pressed the button, his voice carried through the mansion's speakers with crystal clarity. "Mrs. Harrington, this is John McLean. I believe you remember me. I used to work for you. My wife and I would like a few minutes of your time." Wife. The word hit Victoria like a slap. They'd married, the janitor and the broken girl, and they'd built something together that was about to eclipse everything the Harringtons had ever achieved. "I have nothing to say to either of you," Victoria called through the intercom, though her voice shook with something that definitely wasn't anger. "That's unfortunate." Leah's voice joined John's, and Victoria was shocked by how much it had changed. Gone was the uncertain teenager who used to stammer apologies for existing. This voice belonged to someone who had learned to speak in boardrooms full of people who once would have dismissed her without a thought. "Because I have quite a bit to say to you." There was a pause, then Leah continued with the kind of devastating calm that came from holding all the cards. "I'm sure you've heard about Conor Dynasty's expansion into New England. We're looking for a flagship location, somewhere with historical significance and architectural distinction. Somewhere that would serve as a symbol of how far we've come." Victoria closed her eyes, seeing her future with terrible clarity. The mansion sold, her family name attached to a fashion empire built by the girl she'd called defective. Every society gathering, every charity gala, every moment for the rest of her life would be shadowed by the knowledge that she'd thrown away someone who became everything she'd pretended to be. "The realtor mentioned that 47 Beacon Hill Avenue might be available," Leah continued. "I wanted to see it for myself before making an offer. For sentimental reasons." That's when Victoria broke. She stumbled down the front steps, her expensive shoes, the last pair she owned that weren't falling apart, clicking against marble that needed repairs she couldn't afford. Her hands shook as she approached the gates that had once been her fortress against people she'd deemed unworthy. "Please," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if the intercom picked up her voice. "Please, we can discuss this like civilized people." The gates opened with the smooth electronic whisper of machinery that still worked, though probably not for much longer. Leah and John walked up the curved driveway with the measured pace of people who had all the time in the world, who could afford to savor this moment they'd waited 15 years to experience. Up close, Victoria could see details that made her situation even more devastating. Leah's jewelry was real, not just expensive, but custom pieces that spoke of relationships with designers who usually worked exclusively for heads of state. John's watch was worth more than Victoria's annual household budget. Even their wedding rings were clearly bespoke creations that probably cost more than most people's cars. But it was their expressions that truly broke Victoria's heart. There was no cruelty there, no vindictive pleasure in her downfall. Instead, they looked at her with something far worse than hatred. They looked at her with pity. "Hello, Victoria," Leah said quietly. "You look." She paused, her eyes taking in the designer clothes that no longer quite fit, the jewelry that didn't quite catch the light properly, the general air of genteel poverty that clung to Victoria like a shroud. "You look tired. What do you want?" Victoria's voice cracked on the question. "Originally, I wanted to prove you wrong. I wanted to stand at these gates as the success you said I could never be, and watch you realize the magnitude of your mistake." Leah's smile was sad rather than triumphant. "But that was a long time ago, when I was still young enough to think that revenge was the same thing as justice." She looked up at the mansion, her eyes cataloging details with the practiced assessment of someone who had learned to evaluate properties as investments rather than dreams. "Now I just want to understand. What was it about a 15-year-old girl that threatened you so much that you had to destroy her completely?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was still burning. Victoria opened her mouth to deliver the same justifications she'd been telling herself for 15 years. Leah had been troubled, ungrateful, fundamentally flawed in ways that made her unsuitable for their world. But looking at the woman Leah had become, at the empire she'd built, at the quiet strength she radiated like heat from the sun, those justifications crumbled into ash. "I was afraid," Victoria whispered, the admission torn from her throat like a confession at gunpoint. "Of what?" "Of you." The words came out in a rush, 15 years of buried truth finally breaking free. From the moment you walked into this house, you were different. Smarter than us in ways we couldn't understand. More creative than Richard had ever been. More determined than anyone I'd ever met. And your dyslexia, it didn't slow you down. It made you think in ways that put the rest of us to shame. John stepped closer to Leah, his hand finding hers with the automatic gesture of a partnership that had weathered every storm. "You were afraid of a child?" he asked, and his voice carried genuine confusion. "I was afraid of what she would become," Victoria said, looking directly at Leah for the first time. "I was afraid that someone so young could have so much potential, and that being around you would make it obvious how limited we really were. How small and petty and ordinary." The admission hung between them like a bridge across 15 years of pain. Victoria saw recognition flash in Leah's eyes. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. "So you tried to break me before I could eclipse you," Leah said quietly. "Yes." The word came out like a death rattle. "And instead, I turned you into someone extraordinary." She looked at the mansion behind her, at the crumbling facade of a life built on appearances rather than substance. Then back at the couple who had built something real from nothing more than talent, love, and determination. "The house," Victoria said, her voice barely audible. "It's yours if you want it. I can't afford the mortgage payments anyway. Consider it. Partial payment on a debt I can never fully repay." But Leah was already shaking her head, her expression soft with something that looked almost like compassion. "I don't want your house, Victoria. I never did. I wanted your approval, your love, your belief that I was worth something." She paused, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "It took me 15 years to learn that the only approval I needed was my own." She turned to John, and the look that passed between them spoke of conversations held in the dark hours of building an empire, of decisions made with love rather than revenge as the guiding principle. "We're not buying the house," Leah said, turning back to Victoria. "But Conor Dynasty is establishing a foundation for young people who age out of the foster care system. People who've been told they don't belong, that they're too different or too broken to succeed." Victoria felt something crack in her chest, not quite her heart breaking, but something harder and colder finally beginning to thaw. "I'd like to name it the Estelle McLean Foundation, after the woman who taught me that family isn't about blood or adoption papers. It's about choosing to love someone and then never walking away." Leah's voice grew stronger, more certain. "We'd like to use your story as part of our mission statement, as an example of what happens when we let fear make our choices instead of love. My story, the woman who was so afraid of a teenager's potential that she threw away the chance to be part of something beautiful." Leah's smile was gentle but implacable. "You'll be famous, Victoria. Not the way you always wanted to be, but in the way you've earned." The devastation of it was perfect, complete, and somehow merciful. Victoria would be remembered not as the villain in Leah's story, but as the cautionary tale that proved love was always stronger than fear, that choosing people was always better than discarding them. "There's one more thing," John said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out an envelope, thick and expensive, and held it out to Victoria with the same respect he'd shown her 15 years ago when she deserved none of it. "Estelle wanted us to give you this." Victoria's hands shook as she opened the envelope. Inside was a check, not for millions, but for enough to save the house, to restore some dignity, to live the rest of her life without the crushing weight of financial desperation. And with it, a note in Estelle's careful handwriting. "Everyone deserves a chance to learn from their mistakes. Use this wisely. Em." "She's 93 now," Leah said quietly, watching Victoria stare at the check with something approaching wonder. "Still sharp as a tack, still the wisest person I've ever known. When I told her we were coming here, she said that revenge was a poison you drink hoping to hurt someone else. She said the antidote was forgiveness, but not the kind that pretends nothing happened. The kind that says, I see who you were, I acknowledge what you did, and I choose to help you become better." Victoria looked up from the check, tears streaming down her face with the ugly honesty of someone whose carefully constructed facade had finally crumbled completely. "Why?" she whispered. "After everything I did to you, why would you?" "Because someone has to break the cycle," Leah said simply. "Someone has to choose love over fear, generosity over revenge, hope over hatred. And because 15 years ago, A wise woman chose to love a broken girl who had nothing to offer but potential. Now I get to pay that forward. She and John turned to leave, their business here complete, their point made without cruelty or vindictiveness. But at the gate, Leah paused and looked back one final time. I forgive you, Victoria. Not because you deserve it, but because holding on to that anger was keeping me from becoming everything I was meant to be. Her smile was radiant with the kind of peace that came from choosing mercy over justice. I hope someday you can forgive yourself too. The gates closed behind them with the same electronic whisper. But this time, Victoria didn't feel trapped. She felt like someone who had been given an undeserved gift. Not just the money, but the chance to spend the rest of her life learning what it meant to choose love over fear. As the Tesla drove away, carrying the couple who had turned rejection into empire, Victoria Harrington stood alone in front of the mansion she would now be able to keep, holding a check that represented not just financial salvation, but something far more precious: the possibility of redemption. The girl she had thrown away had returned not as a conqueror, but as a teacher. And the lesson was simple, devastating, and transformative. The people we discard often become the very ones who save us from ourselves. 6 months later, the Estelle McLean Foundation headquarters occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming building in downtown Boston, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city where 2 teenagers had once shared dreams that seemed impossible. Leah stood at those windows now, watching the afternoon sun paint the Charles River in shades of gold, her hand resting on the gentle curve of her belly where their first child grew with each passing day. The Patterson girl got into MIT, John said from behind her, his voice warm with the satisfaction that came from watching someone else's dreams take flight. Full scholarship, plus a mentorship with one of their top engineering professors. She wants to design sustainable fashion manufacturing systems. Leah smiled, remembering 17-year-old Maya Patterson, another foster care graduate who had been told she was too ambitious for someone with her background. Now she would be attending one of the world's most prestigious universities, funded by an organization that existed because 2 other foster kids had refused to accept the limitations others had placed on them. How many is that this year? Leah asked, though she already knew the answer. She kept track of every scholarship recipient, every mentorship placement, every young person who walked through their doors believing they weren't enough and left knowing they were everything. 47 college placements, 32 trade school programs, and 15 direct apprenticeships with partner companies. John recited with the pride of someone who had learned that the most valuable ROI was measured in transformed lives. Plus the 3 who started their own businesses with our microloan program. The foundation had grown beyond their wildest projections, fueled not just by Conor Dynasty's profits, but by donations from an unlikely source, Victoria Harrington. She had quietly sold off most of her remaining assets and donated the proceeds, along with her time as a volunteer counselor for young women struggling with self-worth issues. Her message was simple but powerful. I threw away someone extraordinary because of my own fears. Don't let anyone else's limitations become your own. Mrs. Conor? The voice belonged to their newest intern, a young man named David who reminded Leah painfully of John at 18. All determination and dreams wrapped in clothes that had seen better days. There's someone here to see you. Says she has an appointment. Leah turned from the window, one hand still resting on her growing belly, and saw her visitor waiting in the reception area. The woman looked to be in her early 20s, with natural hair styled in an elaborate crown and clothes that spoke of someone who understood fashion but couldn't afford to indulge in it. Most remarkably, she carried herself with the same mixture of defiance and vulnerability that Leah remembered from her own teenage years. Amara Williams? Leah asked, extending her hand to the young woman who had requested this meeting through their foundation's website. It's so good to finally meet you in person. Mrs. Conor, Amara said, and her voice carried the careful control of someone who had learned not to show too much hope. Thank you for seeing me. I know you must be incredibly busy. Never too busy for someone with a dream worth nurturing, Leah replied, gesturing toward her office. Please tell me about your vision. As they settled into comfortable chairs, Leah noticed details that spoke of a story she knew by heart. Clothes that were clean but worn, shoes that had been carefully maintained past their prime, hands that bore the calluses of someone who worked multiple jobs to survive. But it was Amara's eyes that told the real story, bright with intelligence and burning with the kind of ambition that came from having nothing left to lose. "I design prosthetics," Amara began, pulling a tablet from a bag that had seen better decades. "Not just functional ones, but beautiful ones. Pieces that make people feel powerful instead of different." She swiped through images that made Leah's breath catch. Prosthetic limbs that looked like works of art, decorated with intricate patterns that celebrated rather than concealed their artificial nature. Adaptive clothing designed to accommodate prosthetics while maintaining elegance and style. Accessories that transformed medical necessity into fashion statement. "This is extraordinary work," Leah said, and she meant it. "Where did you study design?" "YouTube mostly. Some online courses when I could afford them." Amara's smile was self-deprecating but determined. "I lost my left arm in a car accident when I was 16. The insurance company gave me a basic prosthetic that looked like something from a 1950s sci-fi movie. I kept thinking, why does medical equipment have to be ugly? Why can't it be beautiful?" The question hit Leah with the force of recognition. It was the same question that had driven her own designs 15 years earlier. Why couldn't things be both functional and beautiful? Why did practicality have to mean giving up on elegance? "What's your dream?" Leah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "I want to start a company that makes prosthetics and adaptive clothing that help people feel gorgeous instead of broken. I want to work with insurance companies to make beauty accessible, not just functionality." Amara's voice grew stronger as she spoke, animated by the vision that clearly sustained her through whatever struggles had brought her to this moment. "I want to change how the world thinks about disability and fashion." "And what do you need to make that happen?" "Everything," Amara said with a laugh that held more hope than bitterness. "Funding, manufacturing connections, business mentorship, legal help with patents. I've got the designs and the passion, but I'm a college dropout with no business experience and a credit score that makes loan officers laugh." Leah leaned back in her chair, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly where their child continued growing. A child who would inherit not just wealth, but the knowledge that love was stronger than fear, that choosing people over profit was always the right answer, that success meant lifting others as you climbed. "John," she called, and her husband appeared in the doorway with the immediate responsiveness of someone who had learned to read her moods across 15 years of partnership. "Come meet our next success story." The introductions were made, coffee was poured, and for the next 2 hours, they talked about dreams and obstacles and the kind of bold thinking that transformed industries. By the time Amara left, she carried with her not just a promise of funding, but something more valuable, the absolute certainty that her vision was worth pursuing. "She reminds me of someone," John said as they watched their newest protege walk toward the elevator with the lighter step of someone whose burden of impossible dreams had just become a roadmap to success. "Everyone does lately," Leah replied, settling back into his arms with the comfortable ease of someone who had found her perfect fit. "It's like the universe keeps sending us younger versions of ourselves, just to remind us how far we've come." That evening, they stood together on the balcony of their Beacon Hill brownstone. Not the Harrington mansion, which Victoria had eventually sold to a family who filled it with laughter and children, but a home they had chosen and designed together. The space reflected everything they had learned about the difference between expensive and valuable. Custom pieces that solved real problems, art from emerging artists they had discovered and supported, furniture that was built to last rather than impress. "I have something for you," John said, his voice carrying the same nervous excitement it had held 15 years ago when he'd saved up $500 for her Fashion Week entry fee. "It's not my birthday," Leah pointed out, though she was already smiling at the familiar ritual of John's surprise gifts. Never expensive things she could buy herself, but thoughtful gestures that reminded her why she had fallen in love with an 18-year-old janitor who saw her potential when no one else could. "It's better than your birthday," he said, pulling a small wrapped package from his jacket pocket. "It's the anniversary of the day you decided to stop hiding and start building." Inside the package was a photograph, not a professional shot, but a candid image taken with someone's phone at the Boston Fashion Week warehouse 15 years ago. It showed Leah at her setup space, hanging her transformative dress with the concentrated intensity of someone who believed her dreams were worth fighting for. In the background, barely visible, stood John and Sophia Chun, watching her with expressions of absolute faith. But it was the inscription on the frame that made Leah's eyes fill with tears. To the girl who taught me that broken isn't the same as worthless, that different is the same as revolutionary, and that love is the only investment that always pays dividends. Forever yours, Jay. I've been carrying this picture in my wallet for 15 years, John said softly. It's the moment I knew we were going to make it, even when everything looked impossible. You had this expression on your face, like you were hanging up the future instead of just a dress. Leah studied the photograph, seeing herself as John had seen her. Not broken or limited or defective, but determined and brilliant and absolutely unstoppable. The girl in the picture had no idea she was 6 months away from her first major breakthrough, 18 months away from her first $1 million contract, 5 years away from her first billion in revenue. But she had known something more important. She was worth fighting for. Thank you, she whispered, the words carrying the weight of 15 years of gratitude for someone who had chosen to love her when she couldn't love herself. For everything. For never giving up. For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. For building this life with me. Thank you, John replied, his hands finding her belly where their child grew. For teaching me that the best partnerships aren't about finding someone to complete you, but finding someone to build something beautiful with. Their kiss tasted like promises kept and futures yet to be written. When they broke apart, both were crying, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming gratitude that came from surviving everything that had tried to destroy them and discovering that they were stronger together than they had ever been apart. Down in the city below them, the lights were beginning to twinkle as Boston settled into evening. Somewhere out there, Amara Williams was probably sketching new designs by the light of a laptop screen, fueled by the same desperate hope that had once sustained 2 teenagers in a Roxbury apartment. Somewhere else, Victoria Harrington was volunteering at a youth center, sharing her story with young people who needed to hear that mistakes didn't have to be permanent, that it was never too late to choose love over fear. And in a small apartment across town, Maya Patterson was probably studying for her MIT entrance exams, dreaming of sustainable fashion systems that would revolutionize an industry, supported by a foundation that existed because 2 people had refused to let rejection be the end of their story. What do you think she'll be like? Leah asked, her hands covering John's where they rested on her belly. Our daughter. Brilliant, John said without hesitation. Determined. Kind. Probably too smart for her own good, just like her mother. She'll never doubt that she's worthy of love, Leah said, the words feeling like a vow. She'll never have to earn her place in her own family. No, John agreed, his voice soft with wonder at the life they were creating. Not just the child growing inside her, but the legacy they were building together. She'll grow up knowing that love isn't something you have to deserve. It's something you choose to give and receive freely. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky above Boston, Leah Conor McLean stood surrounded by everything she had built from nothing. A marriage that had survived every storm, a business empire that changed lives, a foundation that proved love was always stronger than fear, and a child who would inherit not just wealth but wisdom. The girl who had once knelt bleeding on marble steps, rejected and discarded by people who should have loved her, had become a woman who chose to lift others rather than tear them down, who broke cycles of pain rather than perpetuating them, who proved every day that the people society throws away often become the very ones who save it. Victoria Harrington had been right about one thing 15 years ago. Leah Conor was different from everyone else. She was better. 5 years later, at the opening of the Estelle McLean Foundation's 10th regional office, Leah Conor McLean stood before a crowd of young people who had been told they were not enough, holding her 4-year-old daughter, a little girl who looked at the world with her mother's determination and her father's unwavering faith in human potential. Dream bigger than the boxes people try to put you in, Leah told them, her voice carried across the packed auditorium. Love harder than the fear that tries to stop you. And remember, the people who count you out are always shocked when you prove them wrong. In the audience, Victoria Harrington applauded with tears streaming down her face, finally understanding that the greatest gift she could have given the world was the mistake that led to Leah Conor's triumph. What an incredible journey. From rejection to redemption, from broken dreams to billion-dollar empires, this story proves that love truly conquers all. If this story touched your heart, drop a comment below telling me about a time when someone believed in you when you couldn't believe in yourself. And if you're new here, smash that subscribe button because stories like these, stories about the power of choosing love over fear, are exactly what this channel is all about. Until next time, keep dreaming bigger than your obstacles.